The Class 14 is one of the more unique examples of early British diesel locomotives, not just because of her design, but also because of her service life with BR and various industrial companies. We've had the so-called teddy bear in Train Simulator Classic for over a decade now. This wasn't originally a Dovetail product. Instead, it's actually a re-released version of an old Iron Horse House add-on, although I don't know when the original was released. After Dovetail acquired the old IHH models in 2013, they re-released some of them on Steam, and the current Class 14 pack was released there in April 2014. It costs 16 New Zealand dollars at full price. Other IHH re-releases included, but were not limited to, the Class 27, BR Standard Class 9F 210O, Class 303 Electric Multiple Unit, Class 56, and BR Standard Class 6MT or Clan Pacific. Incidentally, I have previously reviewed the Class 303, and I'll put a link to said video in the top right corner if I remember to do so. As for the Class 56, she has since received an enhancement pack from Armstrong Powerhouse, which makes the former IHH model a little bit more tolerable. And now for a brief history on the Class 14. 56 examples of this 060 diesel hydraulic design were built at British Railway's own Swindon Works in 1964 and 1965. They were intended as a replacement for the iconic pannier tank steam locomotives, having been designed for branch lines and short-distance freight trains between local yards, otherwise known as trip workings. But that very same kind of work was quickly disappearing from the BR network due to road competition, and this begs the question as to why the Class 14s were even built in the first place. In any case, the locomotives are otherwise known by their nickname of teddy bears, with said nickname coming from a foreman at Swindon Works who called the new diesels teddy bears in a reference to the Great Bear, a one-off 462 Pacific steam locomotive built by the Great Western Railway in 1908. The teddy bear's off-centre cab reminds me of Kiwi Rail's rare DSJ class, even though the DSJ was built 20 years after the Class 14 and by a completely different manufacturer, namely Toshiba as opposed to Swindon Works. The Class 14s had an embarrassingly short working life with British Railways, but it wasn't down to poor reliability, but rather the rapid demise of their intended freight work. The entire class was withdrawn from service by 1970, but this wasn't the end of their story, as several examples were sold on to industrial service with the National Coal Board, British Steel Corby, Blue Circle Cement, and other companies. The Class 14s remained in industrial service until at least the early 1980s, but considering how short-lived these things were under BR, I'm surprised that they even got a TOPS classification. Out of the 56 Class 14s that were built, a healthy 19 have survived into preservation. Weirdly, in 2005, one of the survivors was leased from her home base at the Kent and East Sussex Railway and used to haul works trains on High Speed 1 prior to its opening. The group of preserved teddy bears includes both the first and last examples of the class, namely D9500 and D9555. In real life, these two are based at Peak Rail and the Dean Forest Railway respectively. Unfortunately, none of the industrial variants, such as D9524 in British Petroleum Light Green and D9530 in NCB Pale Blue, are included in TS Classic. Only BR Green with wasp stripes and a strange BR Blue livery with the headcode panels blanked out, but I don't remember when this blue livery was added. Besides BR Blue, none of the unique Preservation Era variants are included in this pack. British Locomotive Studios were making a large Class 14 reskin pack around 3 years ago, but it was never finished. However, 2 reskins intended for that pack have since been made available on their website, and they depict 2 variants of the maroon livery that locomotive number D9523 has carried in preservation. As for unpowered rolling stock, the main pack does include a small amount of it, specifically the 5-plank and 7-plank wagons with an LMS 20-ton brake van. But this rolling stock all dates back to the Kuju Rail Simulator era. In other words, it would have originally been included with something like the Somerset and Dorset Joint Railway. And the Class 14 certainly wasn't the first case of Dovetail recycling these wagons. Like a lot of early BR diesels, the Teddy Bear has 4-digit headcode boxes at each end. When you're in the scenario editor, you can click on the locomotive and change the headcode to say something realistic, like 4G14, or a random 4-letter word. Inside the cab, we can see that this locomotive has 2 control stands, which means that the driver could easily change directions if needed. Unfortunately, there isn't much functionality in this thing, and certainly no cold start procedure for a start. The only things that are clickable in the cab are the controls for the windscreen wipers, plus the cab light, marker lights, throttle, reverser, and brakes. That's it. You don't even get functional windows and doors. The horn and engine sounds aren't all that good, in my opinion. And indeed, IHH add-ons were notorious for their poor quality sounds, and in the case of the Class 14 at least, it seems Dovetail didn't bother making any improvements. The Prime Mover sounds more like a washing machine that's working itself to pieces than a Paxman 6YJ-XL, which is what it's supposed to be. As for the horn, this is not a dynamic/looped sound, and you only get the same short blast whenever you press the spacebar. And here's a demonstration of what the Class 14 sounds like when she's notching up. The Class 14 is very basic when it comes to the driving experience. Because of her hydraulic transmission, you don't need to do any gear changing on this locomotive. And since there's no realistic cold start procedure simulated, which isn't necessarily a good thing, you just have to push the reverser in forward, release the brakes, and open the throttle. If you're after a more realistic diesel experience in TS Classic, I recommend picking up the Class 37 from Armstrong Powerhouse, despite my criticisms of AP's antics within the last year. And don't even get me started on the high price of the 37. Dovetail's re-release of the IHH Class 14 came about in a time when, for whatever reason, lots of their locomotive add-ons only came with 4 scenarios for any given route. 2 of them were tutorials, and the other 2 were career mode scenarios. In the case of the Teddy Bear, her scenarios are for the West Somerset Railway, and the TS Classic version of this route was released way back in November 2013. It has since been superseded by a superior version in Train Sim World. At the end of the day, I don't know whether or not I can recommend a Dovetail's re-released version of the Class 14 in TS Classic. On the one hand, the overall quality of this thing leaves a lot to be desired, especially where the sounds are concerned. But on the other hand, she's one of the more obscure British diesels available in TS Classic, with her unique design and history being the main reasons why I've kept her installed in my collection.